Very beginning, we had a lot of support, and I kind of doubled down on what I knew, on the pull myself up from my bootstraps. I don't want people to pity me. This can't be my story, like I'm going to keep going and keep achieving and all that kind of stuff. And, like all these things that I tried to help use for coping, all these like positive tropes or these, I call it toxic positivity. It's like almost like too much. And at about the 4-month mark, the shock wears off. And I don't think you realize when you're in shock that you're in shock, but the shock wore off and most people went back to their normal lives. And that's when the courage really started to come up because I was not the same. I was never going to be the same. And I hadn't processed all these feelings up until that point. And so it just started to like let out. I was very fortunate to early on be set up with a grief counselor through Seattle Children's Journey program. It's a free resource, which was amazing. I don't know where I would be without them and my counselor Abby. But we I was unpacking all these emotions and talking to her about all these things that I would say to like even my mom, and she's like, "Oh, well, you can't say that or whatever." And I'm like, I'd be mad at intact families, right? It's not reasonable. It's not like it's not that I want somebody else to experience it. I just wanted my son back. And so I think what happened was this switch just flipped in my head, and I'd be at work, and I had just become a manager, like 6 weeks after he passed away, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to do this how I'm going to do this. I'm going to figure this out because what's the worst that can happen? I've already had the worst thing that could happen. What can happen? They're going to try to fire me? No worries. And so that was my first step into courage because it's just like not like all the things that I'd ever feared before that might have kept me from doing something before were gone because I'm like, what's literally the worst thing that can happen? I've just survived that. So that was my first step into building courage. And then there was a second step, which I think is so important that it took me a while to be able to share. But my soon after my son died, a couple months later, I got pregnant with my daughter, and that was just a really humbling experience as well, and just like in a lot of anger and all this other stuff. But so thankful to have something tethering me to this earth. And I remember when she first came around, she had a couple of medical issues that required a feeding tube, and so my husband had gone back to work. I'm home trying to manage all these things. I think she pulled her tube out, and I had to put it back in. And like, oh my gosh, just having to learn how to do that was just really, again, humbling as a parent. And I remember just there was a day where I was not coping very well. I had no sleep. She had no sleep. She's crying. I'm crying. I call my husband, like, you need to come home. And I'm beating myself up about the fact that I'm not perfect for her. And like, what am I doing here? And my son died, so how can I be a good parent? I'm not a good parent. And he said this brilliant thing to me, which I'll tell everybody. He said, you don't need to be the perfect mom. You need to be a happy mom. You need to be a sad mom. You need to be a frustrated mom. You need to be a silly mom. You need to be a mom that's sorry. You need to be like all the things. He's like, because one day she will feel all of those things and she'll be looking to you to figure out what does that mean. And that just, I think he literally eradicated shame in that like
Hmm.
one statement to me. Because now it was no longer like, I'm all these terrible things and what am I doing? And I'm not good enough for her. It's all these like, oh, I'm human. And it's the Maya Angelou quote, right? Like when you know better, you do better, and it's just like, oh, thank you for teaching me this. And it helped me actually to unpack a lot of the shame I had around my son's death because there was all these what ifs, right? That I was just like, I should have known better. I should have known this better. And it was just like, and instead I was able to kind of turn that around for myself in times of coping and say, thank you for teaching me this. And so that's kind of those two things really just allowed me to unlock courage in both a professional and then a personal environment.
I'm trying to think, do I need to tell people about your podcast as a way to learn about how to parent, how to be courageous, how to be human? And I think it's all those things. Your story and the way you tell it and the way you lean into courage is so powerful and amazing. And I want to say thank you because I think you're teaching me so many things that I could never thank you enough for that. And I'm really excited to be talking about courage with you, because you are the definition of courage. And oddly enough, this morning, as as whether it's the universe or maybe just the algorithm, I saw a Brene Brown video this morning, a little clip where she talks about vulnerability is the most accurate measurement of courage. And you, in your story, what you just shared with us in all the episodes, through vulnerability, you are um, that definition of courage. What have you learned about vulnerability in this time
Oh,
since Lincoln's passing?
I love vulnerability. I think I started, as I started to kind of express myself and talk more about him and, not so much of his passing. It's mostly just been my life with him and what I got to enjoy and love. And then all the hard stuff afterward. I think every bereaved parent, like, we hate talking about that actual day. It's all the moments before and after, right? Like, and so I think what I learned about vulnerability is that it takes some practice. And it takes courage just to say it the first time, right? The first time I launched my podcast, I like, remember I put it out there in the universe. I'm just like, like it's out there. I guess I could take it back if I wanted to, but it's out there, And so it was kind of like this, like, I hyperventilated for like a day and then I got over it. But I think what I learned about vulnerability is that it means everything, and in times when I share something and people don't receive it well, or they kind of back away a little bit, that's fine. I think that's, at first, you're worried about the other person's comfortability. And I'm like, why am I worried about that? I'm uncomfortable all the time. I can make them uncomfortable for a little bit. It's totally fine. Although I learned some phrases that I can tack on to help them feel better about it.
Mm,
um, but as I became more vulnerable, I ended up getting support from places that I didn't expect it. All my traditional avenues of support, like family and friends and all of that, I expected to be there for me. And after the first few months, it wasn't as much. And it was the random manager that I used to work with and him sitting down and thinking about, gosh, like, what does that pain feel like? And him actually going through a scenario with me and saying, like, oh, when I lost my daughter at the aquarium for 4 minutes, it was the longest 4 minutes of my life, and his heart's pounding and he's talking about how he's feeling and the clench in his chest. And then he's just like, is it anything like that? I'm like, yes, that's what it feels like. It feels like that until it goes, like, every waking moment until your heart goes numb. And he was just like, whoa. But up until that point, he was the first person to ever sit with me and do that. Everybody else goes, I can't imagine. I can't imagine. He was the first one that was just like, I can try. And that was everything. So for all the times when somebody would be like, "Oh, you know what? I'll come back. I don't want to interrupt you in your moment of weakness or whatever." Or, if people didn't it didn't land well and they're like, "Oh, okay, well, thank you," and they kind of move on. Like, for every one of those, I would have maybe for every 10 of those, I'd have maybe one person that would come through in a really meaningful way. And I'm like, that was worth it. That was absolutely worth it.
and what courage it takes for that 1 in 10 to come forward and try to put into words what it's like to feel with you in those moments. Enrique Martin was on the podcast a few episodes ago talking about empathy and how it requires to suspend judgment of oneself and to feel with the other person, and how courageous it is for that 1 in 10 to be able to come and try, just experiment with you
Yeah.
what that feels like. And I really appreciated you sharing that, because um, it helps me understand what that would be like. It
Mm.
helps me be more empathetic for others. And my wife's best friend years ago, when she lost her mother, she talked about how people in the office would just avoid her. They would
Yeah.
not talk to her, and how isolating that was for her. And it just made things so much worse. And she just wished people would come up and talk to her and ask her how she's doing, ask
Yeah.
her what it feels like, even if they don't know. But that, again, that takes courage to be able to do that. And I really appreciate how you say, like, what's the worst thing that could happen? Like, the worst thing has already happened. So, I'm already there. Like, come up and talk to me. So it's that having courage with others to
Mm.
feel empathy, to actually feel with them is sounds very powerful.
And I think too, I had a few friends who were like, I'm not quite sure what to say to you, and I don't want to say the wrong thing. And I'm like, the fact that you're willing to talk to me about it means that you will have grace every single time you say something wrong, because I say something wrong. There have been times when, I've seen people who have been bereaved, whether it's been a parent or a sibling or a child, and I don't say the right thing. You think that I'm an expert in this, right? But no, we're human. But I think when you see somebody's intent, like you can feel somebody's positive intention, you can give them grace if your wording isn't quite right. And if they're open to it, you can give them some feedback of how they can switch it and change it. And then again, what a lovely gift to give someone.